Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe and keep watching more details. The Curse of Oak Island recap, the one where they probably found the original money pit. Last week's episode of The Curse of Oak Island was always going to be hard to beat. But Marty Lagina is smiling in the picture above for a reason, and that's because he thinks the team have finally found the original money pit. If his belief turns out to be true, this week's episode will go down as one of the biggest moments ever in Oak Island history and could finally lead to the team solving the mystery of what is hidden on the island. Whether that is treasure, priceless artifacts, or a tomb full of bones, we know one thing for sure. This is going to be an exciting rest of the season. Here's 10 things we learned in Season 5, Episode 6. After the 2 pieces of pottery found on last week's episode, Jack Beckley discovered more in the H8 spoils, including one that has a very distinctive design. This could well help the team get a much more accurate idea of where and when the pottery is from. As well as the pottery, Jack also found a second piece of bone to add to the first one found on last week's episode. But this wasn't just any piece of bone. Everybody in the room seemed stunned when Dr. Krista Brasso and Dr. Xiao Yang of St. Mary's University revealed that the weird patterned fragment of bone found this episode still had soft tissue and hair on it. The fact you could actually see the hair and the follicles on the screen was pretty creepy. As Craig Tester pointed out, the hairs were quite spaced out, which meant it looked quite likely that what they were looking at was human skin. Dr. Brasso said the soft tissue could also be fat. As we found out in a letter from Timothy R. Frazier, coordinator of the Forensic Sciences program in the Department of Biology at St. Mary's, more testing is going to be done on the bones. The fact that one of them still had that tissue on it is great for the team, because it should help the experts find out a lot more about where the person it belonged to came from. It was slightly unclear what was meant in the letter by the bones being different. Does that mean different people, or could it just mean different parts of the same body? The bones are going to be carbon dated so that they can find out how old they are, and it looks like if they're over a certain age, the team won't necessarily have to notify the authorities, which means their discovery won't hamper their efforts. As well as the pottery and bone, Jack and Dan Henske, who has suddenly reappeared on the series, Where Has He Been?, also found something in the spoils that looked like a piece of leather from old footwear, as well as something that looked like parchment. Could this somehow be linked to the piece of parchment Frederick Blair and William Chappell found in 1897 on which were written the letters VI? The sneak peek for next week's episode suggested the new piece of parchment and the leather could actually be a very important find. We'll get into that below, but first, Lyme disease is no laughing matter, so Rick, who said he hadn't been to the doctor in 50 years, is pretty lucky that Marty persuaded him to go to the local clinic. It may have just looked like a small bite, but it had the telltale bullseye pattern won from a deer tick infected with Lyme disease, which is what it turned out to be. Because he got treatment early, Rick should be fine, but you can read our article here about how serious the consequences can actually be. This was when it started getting really exciting. With the help of geophysicist Mike West, the team used a Joule induction device to scan a 2-foot diameter area all the way down H8. We got told that if the device picked up metal, the graph they were looking at on a screen would spike outwards. So what did it do right around the level where the Chappell vault is supposed to be? It spiked outwards. That was enough to convince Marty that the anomaly was the Chappell vault. It didn't take Marty long to make the connection between the Chappell vault and the money pit being part and parcel of the same thing. In his words, well, hi-ho. So in one hole we got evidence of something at the Chappell vault level. We got pottery where it can't be, and we got oddball stuff. It's the money pit. Marty said the results from the Joule induction device pointed at there being a big chunk of metal right where drill operator Ivan hit a void on last week's episode. He added, "I have liked H8 as our target anyway, because of that pottery found at 200 feet and the bone. There is just no other way to explain that other than that is the money pit. And having a chance at piercing the vault too at 155 feet as we go down is doubly exciting." He might have had Lyme disease, but if there was any news that was going to get Rick back on his feet, this was it. Hearing Marty say the immortal words, "I think we found the money pit," is something Rick has been waiting for a long, long time. It looked like he couldn't really believe it. In his own words, Marty describes himself as the skeptic-in-chief, and the skeptic-in-chief has just pronounced, "We've found the money pit." You can read about the history of the money pit here. At some point, hopefully next episode, the team are going to bore down into H8 with a massive 60 in Kaysen. We know they do this because we saw it on the drilling down episode at the start of the season. How they're going to do it without destroying what's down there, we have no idea. Ditto for how they're going to recover whatever it is they find. But what will they find? It looks it could go one of several different ways. As narrator Robert, could it be? Clotworthy said at the end of the episode, what will they find? A treasure vault filled with gold and priceless artifacts, precious manuscripts written on parchment, or a tomb containing ancient human remains. The sneak peek for next week's episode showed a clip of a man, likely an expert or researcher, saying, "If someone was going to build this engineering marvel, it would be Sir Francis Drake." Drake was a very interesting character, but what was his possible link to Oak Island? You can find out more about Sir Francis Drake in our article here. The preview for next week's episode also showed the team excavating a square-shaped piece of topsoil which archaeologist Laird Niven said he didn't believe was natural. But the really interesting bit from the sneak peek was, the preview for next week's episode also showed the team back once again visiting Dr. Brosseau at St. Mary's University, where they get another item, thought to be the piece of parchment or leather found by Jack Begley and Dan Henske this week, tested. Amazingly, the results show it is a piece of book binding. Of all the theories about what's buried on Oak Island, we've always thought Shakespeare's manuscripts was a far-fetched one. But could it be?